putting the clock there as well because I'm on Arab time actually, so beware. So I have been an active protagonist at the intersections of community cultural work, artistic representation and political activism in Sydney over the past 3 decades. In what I would describe, and I think it's important to contextualise how we all work, in, I guess, from my experience, a predatory, racist, nationalist, colonial settler state, and increasingly white supremacist kinds of, I guess, norms are becoming normed. This state, at the outset I want to acknowledge, has never acted in good faith with or with moral purpose to work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, leaders and communities to work towards a critical self-determination. This state plays lip service to a dismally shallow formation of multiculturalism where elites within our own communities maintain heteropatriarchal norms, marginalising any critical feminist dissent. So that's where I'm coming from. So, social justice work has been at the heart of my practice for the past 30 years in Sydney. Working at the grassroots with migrant and refugee communities, notably with women, brings you into the intimate realm of people's lives, and with that comes great responsibility. In the course of this work, I have learnt much about power, politics, and people themselves. I have always applied a human rights approach in this work where empowerment and self-determination are fundamental elements as much as being community accountable. Certainly the last 18 years, an intensely racist, anti-refugee political environment has poisoned public debate and social relations, enabling a suite of brutal policies and state practices, including the arbitrary detaining of those seeking asylum for indefinite periods of time. As a community advocate and artist, this is one area of work that I've intensely reflected and acted on in terms of how we might empower those whose voices are least heard and who are at great risk indeed if they speak out. It was around this time, roughly 2 decades ago, that I moved away from more traditional capacity building community work to community cultural development, a field that that expressly uses culture and the arts as a tool for social change. Story work as a means to empowerment is about engaging people to create, learn, express, connect, communicate, and heal in nurturing ways. This work is also about fostering creativity in all its diversity to inspire and facilitate critical dialogue among and between disparate peoples, uniting around shared oppression. Projects with Arabic-speaking, Sierra Leonean, Ethiopian, Somali, South Sudanese, Bosnian, Afghan women and their communities have unearthed stories of resistance, uplift and sacrifice. As complex and exacting as this work is, a fundamental aim has been to cultivate a safe space for marginalised people to share their stories in their own language and on their own terms. I've engaged in projects that traverse literature, film, radio, music, theatre and visual arts. So we have produced a library of works that have contributed to a vibrant and diverse multicultural community in Western Sydney. Some of this collaborative work includes books that have been mentioned, Poetry Across Rooftops, films, Horia and Her Sisters, the Book of African Australian Stories, and feature documentaries working with overseas journalists from Sierra Leone. Over the last 25 years, there's one of the books, The Book of the Living. Over the last 25 years, together with a community of Arab feminist artists, so I'm kind of like Jiva, I have community culture work, but I produce and write my own work. I have worked with a community of Arab feminist artists in Sydney, and we have aspired to make work not only on our own political terms, but also in response to the neglect of critical, race-conscious feminist concerns. With the erasure of minorities in representational form from majority conceptual space in theatre, literary, visual and screen cultures, artistic expression plays a significant role in our collective resistance. To that end, our performative activism has inevitably had to respond to the essentialising Orientalist tropes of mainstream culture and to the everydayness of Orientalist narrative and hyperactivity. From performative political flash mobbing to theatre, this has been an important site where Spivak's question, can the subaltern speak, is a meaningful and is understood in terms that we can shape and control. It has been momentary, but nevertheless empowering. So I have always been a key reader of critical theory. My artistic and activist work is especially informed by the methodologies of key theorists of the post-colonial feminist field, guided in practice by Aboriginal women, beginning in 1988 with the anti-bicentennial protest movement. This was my induction into political activism in this city and state. And those women from Bundjalung, Wiradjuri, Gamilaroi communities gave me a language of, I guess, anti-colonialism and working respectfully in the practice of working respectfully in solidarity. I guess I want to state today as well that I ascribe to the idea that the separation between academia and activism is a false one. I believe a fundamental responsibility of the intellectual is to the socio-political, and I think the late Edward Said provided a pathway in this regard. His intervention has been crucial, and in understanding how knowledge production formed by Western subjects about the other works in a multiplicity of contexts. Professor Said was able to bridge the divide between theory and practice precisely because he was able to move beyond the academy into social, cultural and political spheres that forced elites, gatekeepers and hegemons into often uncomfortable dialogue about power, race and imperialism. My own work is much influenced by this kind of model. In all the disparate settings of my cultural work, questions of representation have naturally figured. Speaking has been a central and ongoing concern, or more precisely, who speaks and who does not. I think that question, can the subaltern speak, is forever relevant because access continues to be systematically denied and obstructed. Just because one person is permitted to speak or invited to speak does not mean that the structures of power have been radically altered. This is how I read that question, can the subaltern speak? My thinking around, I guess, this has been because I'm a grassroots worker and an engaged critic and activist, and I don't see those necessarily separate. I'm fundamentally concerned with the problematics of voice as an indicator of agency and the impact of subaltern voices. So that Audre Lorde has been a really important influence on me. She was an African-American poet and she was a grassroots community worker as well. So I just want to, I guess, acknowledge some of the influences on me, and I'll just show you the last slides. That was a billboard we put up in Sydney during a particularly nasty racial profiling episode that hasn't really gone away. The revolution will not be funded. And that goes to the heart of what everyone's been talking about. We can't wait to be funded to be activists. And I'll just finish with my reflection. As I reflect on the past 30 years of activism, community-based work and creative practice, I can see that there have been political shifts, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. Arab women as speaking subjects are more publicly visible in the present, and this represents a tangible example of change. But even within these contexts, there are still power struggles. Whilst the gatekeepers remain in control of the narrative, what has not yet happened is the emancipating process where the structures and systems of power have been ruptured down to the root and thus permanently altered. I like to imagine in their place a radical transformative space will emerge that is inclusive, non-hierarchical, cooperative, participatory and non-discriminatory. This is where our collective intellectual energies indeed must take focus.